Alright guys, now that we've got everything sounding decent in terms of gain, everything's a bit more balanced out now as well, we're going to go over using EQ. So why do we use EQ? We want to make sure that there are no clashing frequencies, and we also want to, as well as we can, give each element as much space in the mix as it possibly can have. So say for example, while producing, and a lot of this stuff can be prevented with just selecting the right sounds, of course. The more I get down the line of music and the more I mix other people's songs, it really shows that the better of a producer you are, the better your sound selection is, and the better your sounds initially go together with each other. That's going to also give you a lot less work down the line. So never try to just skimp out on work or be lazy in the beginning when producing because you think it's going to be fixed somewhere down the line. That's something that I did when I was younger, and something that I would definitely recommend for you to not do. So let's go over using EQ right now. I'm going to go and just mess around with the drums for now. So as I said, EQ and most things in mixing are important in the context of the rest of the song. You want to stay away from the solo button as much as possible because you can EQ a kick drum for an hour and it'll sound great by itself, and then you pop it in a mix and it just, everything just sounds worse than before. So you want to make sure that on one hand you're making sure that the elements are sitting together. So I very rarely, unless I'm trying to find a frequency that I don't like or something that I feel like is really needs to be addressed on a personal level, I very rarely just solo one instrument or one element. But I do like soloing certain different groups and making everything work as a unit. So for that, that's going to be the drums first. So let's go ahead and give these drums a quick listen by themselves, and then go ahead and edit everything as much as we have to. So I'm going to be using EQ3 for now. This is because I want something a bit more broad and giving me the ability to just kind of affect the frequency spectrum of the drums as a whole a lot more. So kind of just having control over just one part of the frequency spectrum. This is splitting up the audio into 3 different parts. So I've got the low end, I've got the mid range, and I've got the high end. And I'm going to try and basically just level this out a bit more in a way that I feel like sounds good. So first of all, though, what we're going to do is select where exactly we want frequencies to start and stop. So let's first select the low module. So around there, that to me sounds like where a lot of the low end thump is really. This is also mainly just affecting the kick drum. Let's go listen to the mid range. That to me is really just picking up most of the frequency spectrum, and the mid range also, of course, is probably the most important part of the frequency spectrum, since that is what translates onto all different kinds of speakers. And this is also where you will find anything from your punch in the low mids for, say, the kick drum and the body of the snare, to the high mids where you're starting to get a bit of those higher, sweeter frequencies in there as well. And let's also check the high end out to make sure that that's all fine. All right, so now what I know that I'm working with, I'm gonna go enable everything and just mess around with the different bands until I like what I'm hearing. It's important to mention that this EQ will make everything a lot louder. So we're going to go ahead and add a utility after this as well. and make this a group. I recommend to make things a group when they work in context. And I'm just going to be guessing here how much I'm increasing the volume and then just hit that back down so I can actually hear what the EQ is doing. That's just very subtly almost adding a bit of more lows, a bit more punch in the mids. And in a sense, I understand when people look at something like this and think, well, why don't I just boost the whole volume of the drums up? Because that's essentially what this looks like. And that's the reason why I have the utility afterwards as well, bringing the gain back down a bit, because that really is the case here, because all of these are different frequency, are affecting different parts of the frequency spectrum with different EQ curves. And this is especially true for more analog type EQs, but in this sense, I'm boosting things level differently, which will lead to a different result if I were to just bump up the volume. And the reason why I'm EQing the drums is because I just want to enhance a bit more of that character. And this is what is commonly known as an additive EQ, where I'm basically adding frequencies. And the reason why I didn't hop straight onto something like subtractive EQ is because to me, subtractive EQ is mainly to do with when I try to fix certain things, and additive EQ is when I'm trying to enhance certain things. So in this scenario, I felt like the drums are already very clean, and I didn't have to do anything really to necessarily clean them up anymore because I still want to preserve as much of the original content as there is. Next up, let's actually go ahead and take a listen to the sub in context with these drums and see if I want to maybe mess around with the sub stem a bit more. So I can see that a lot of the lower frequencies are going a lot lower than they actually have to be. And since the main fundamental frequency is somewhere around here, I'd say 50 hertz or something, I don't really feel like I need all of that content. So we're just going to go ahead and use a high pass filter to see how much we can take away from that really subby low end to give us a bit more headroom. So what you saw me doing here is, again, high passing this at around 30 hertz with a little boost here as well for the low end. Actually, let's go ahead and just remove that just a bit. And I'm playing around with the idea of boosting at around 250 hertz or something like that, because that's where you get a lot of the cut of these types of basses in context with the rest of the stuff. So I really want this to be kind of taking over a bit more of the lower mids and less of the high end, because that's where the chords are. So I think that I'm thinking of just reducing the high end a bit more. I'm also going to engage oversampling and basically make sure that this is really sitting mostly in the lower mids somewhere around here, and let's see what that is doing. So that's really just subtly kind of touching up that substem a bit more. And now I'm just going to keep on adding more elements in here. Again, as you can see, EQ is just kind of a way of taking things away in certain places, adding things in certain places, and then making sure that it cohesively works with the rest of the song. So a lot of these individual things that I'm doing, eventually I'm going to also edit them in context. So I'm doing what I think with my ears will sound best, and then down the line, say once I'm going to add the chord synth now, I'll see, okay, maybe I want to change something else. So let's go ahead and listen here. So to me, with that bit of EQ, that's kind of helping the bass cut in the mix a bit more to where I want it to sit. So I might actually just also boost it just a tiny bit, because it's lost a lot of that buzziness in the top end since I've removed a few frequencies there. And yeah, as you can tell, it's really sitting nicely with the chord synth now. And now to the chord synth, let's go ahead and load up another EQ8 here and see what we can do with this to make it sit a bit better with the rest of the mix. So you can see here that this is a very subtle EQ almost, but it's very subtly helping the chords just sit a bit above the rest. So I'm basically just sweetening up the air and the high end a bit more. I'm also making sure that I'm taking out a bit of the resonant frequencies here, just very, very slightly, almost, barely noticeable. It's like 4 dBs. I'm also very subtly taking out a bit of the 1K mid-range. I feel like this is where a lot of synths especially can start layering up a bit, but then also making sure that I'm boosting a bit around 500, 400. And this is, again, kind of pushing, pulling. This is creating different frequency reactions and making sure that nothing seems too stale as well a bit. So just messing around with the frequency spectrum a bit. And also now that it's more in context, I can tell what's working with the rest and what's not. So let's go ahead and take another listen to this. And now that I'm getting close to the result that I want, I'm also going to add this lead synth in, because I feel like I'm going to do quite a bit of work with this one. As you could also see here, I didn't have to high pass it. That was already done beforehand. And let's take a quick listen to this lead synth, because I remember when I was playing for it the first time, it didn't really cut through much. So this is a pretty weird EQ curve right here, but I know that later down the line, I'm probably going to add a bit of reverb to this lead synth because I want to add a bit of depth to it as well. I want to make sure that it sits a bit more in the back. To me, this isn't a main element. It's also very buzzy in the high end, and I kind of want to leave all that space for the chords, but I want to make sure that I'm kind of getting it to work in the mid-range nicely. So I'm boosting quite heavily there. It's a really weird EQ curve, but this is basically going to make sure that I'm not cutting anything out that it doesn't need to be cut out. Just for the last time, though, I'm going to turn it up a bit more to see if it does work more as a proper lead on top of everything else, or if it just really is quite annoying. I feel like now that I took out a lot of that high end, and again, notice how I did this in context of everything else. So this wasn't done while soloing, because that would have, I probably never would have done this if I were in solo mode, because this is probably just going to sound like crap by itself. But in context, this is really helping me kind of just elevate the lead a bit more, or being able to elevate the lead with gain a bit more, to make sure that everything's sitting in the space that it has to sit. Let's give this a final listen again. Yeah, that's really screechy to me in the high end, but I don't want to be losing too much of those frequencies, so let's just go ahead and edit that around a bit, make this a bit more subtle, because I don't want to be losing all of that characteristic, but I don't want it to be too buzzy in the high end. It's quite annoying to me, so we're just going to go ahead and leave that as it is. And we're going to now move over into, I don't remember me needing to EQ this. Let's just give this another listen. All right, so this is actually really important because I made a quick mistake, and I totally forgot that the lead isn't actually, this is just a supporting role. The vocal stem is actually the main part for this section in a sense. So we can take this volume back down a bit more, which is nice. And well, this is already pretty even. So we're just going to go ahead and boost this up maybe another dB and see what this does. Actually, let's go and undo that. And I only want to boost in the drop section. So let's go ahead and do that. So making sure that they're really cutting through in the drop with just gain. Again, this is just with gain. Nothing too fancy going on here. All right, cool. Let's take a quick listen to that. All right, cool. Let's take this down just a touch, make sure that everything's sitting properly. And now this is, to me, this is working. So this to me is now coming together nicely, and we can go ahead and start focusing on a compression and all those other things in the next video. But before we do that, I'm just going to go over the last stem that I didn't listen to properly, which is the piano stem. So if we give that a quick listen. So my intuition here would just be to, again, kind of maybe bring out a bit more life in the piano stem, but I feel like it was intended that it's this dark. So let's go ahead and listen to the pad stem and see if maybe we can get some more life out of here. And I feel like I've decided here now that this is fine to me because I'm going to be adding a bit of EQ and compression on the mix bus later on, the master bus that is. And I feel like that's going to be taking care of a lot of this stuff. But again, my mind can change throughout, but I really want to get started on using some compression.